Good morning, crime community. I'm here to read out about Learning to Stand and Speak by Mary Kelley. This is called Rational Beings. At women's schools in the North and South, principals and teachers insisted that they were teaching students to think, to reason, investigate, compare, methodize, and judge, as a circular for the Petersburg Female College in Virginia proclaimed. Those who taught at Clark Female Seminary in Berryville, Virginia, sought rather to cultivate them, to store the mind, to make it an active agent in educating itself, rather than a mere spectacle for the ideas of others. Zilpath Grant and Mary Lyon told their students at Ipswich Female Seminary that they must do more than to sit still and merely receive. They had instead to recognize that their minds cannot be improved without your activity, and yet the very emphasis upon disciplining the mind to develop its critical faculties stood in the contradictory relation to the method of instruction. Whatever a student was enrolled as a female or a male institution, rote memorization and recitation prevailed. Though the student's career books assigned at the beginning of the term were committed to memory and their contents delivered daily, the approach taken by Brown's Francis Wayland is instructive both as illustrating the pedagogy and in demonstrating the students were nonetheless able to engage in thinking independently. As the president of Brown from 1827 to 1855, Wayland taught moral philosophy to thousands of students. He began each of his classes with recitation. Calling on students one by one, Wayland interrupted now and again to highlight the connections between the content they were presenting. That exercise concluded, the rest of the class was devoted to Wayland's lecture, which students copied into their notebooks. Silas Bailey, a student of Wayland and later a teacher of moral philosophy, recalled that his lectures seemed to us more wonderful than anything we had ever heard. Still more important, thinking about the elaboration on the content came after the classes. It was then that the students gathered and made their teacher's commentary the theme of the most earnest conversation. Other college students were less fortunate than those schooled by Francis Wayland. In a letter to Kate Stowell, the woman who would marry after graduation from Dartmouth, Charles Rounds, described the abstract students enrolled in moral philosophy submitted daily. Some of the class merely copied the essential portions of the book, omitting enough to give proper condensation. Rounds told her students who were resistant to the memorization and recitation of the classes that occupied their initial 2 years openly expressed dissatisfaction with the routine. They were expected to wade through Homer as though the Iliad were a bog. Lamented Harvard James Freeman Clark, it is nearly exclusive emphasis on the classics themselves that frustrated Rounds, who searched Dartmouth's library for modern literature, especially the young poetry being written by Americans. There were scores of volumes of Latin and Greek, he told Stowell, but he said, the exasperation, there were little of the any Belles Lettres, hardly an English classic to be found. Neither were there any Bryant or Longfellow. In fact, he said to Stowell, I don't believe half a dozen of our good poets are to be found in the whole collection. Early America schooling. In every male student who complained about the pedagogy or the curriculum, there was a woman at the academy or seminary who took up the same approach at Wayland students at Brown. She enthusiastically embraced her schooling, no matter the method of instruction or the text assigned. One of the thousands who understood the potential inherent in the knowledge women were claiming for themselves, Bessie Lacey, a student at Edgeworth Female Seminary in Greensboro, North Carolina, was no disregard. Telling her brother about the position she and her for their recitations, Lacey declared in March 1848, we are all so busy, buzz, buzz from morning till night, rattle away goes the pencils on the slates. Oh, how many hard problems wear away our patience and slate pencils. 9 days later, she had written to her father, I love to have a heap to do. It makes me feel so busy and consequential. 2 decades later, Margaret Bradley had found the course of study equally demanding as Miss Turner's Academy in Abington, Virginia. Bailey wrote to former classmate Margaret Campbell, that she was very busy indeed, and my studies were doubly increased by the addition of the history of Greece, parsing in the Milton's Paradise Lost, Spelling's Grimshaw's Dictionary, and the historical maps of Greece and Rome. Pleasure ascended with pride in all she accomplished, resonated through Bradley's letters to Campbell. I earnestly wish for all the vacancies in my head to be filled as soon as possible, she declared, and connection Lacey made between being busy and coming consequential register not only a pride of intellectual productivity, but also a confidence that resulted from the daily use of reasoning and rhetorical faculties in writing compositions and in commanding the subjects taught at these schools. Lacey and Bradley were apprenticing themselves as interpreters of text and producers of knowledge. The vacancies, as Bradley labeled them, were being filled for performed and recitation, which served as tangible demonstrations of the knowledgeable students were making their own, and perhaps more notable in terms of preparing themselves for role in civil society. Daily recitation and its culmination in the compositions addressed, the orations delivered at public examinations were equally tangible demonstrations of self-mastery. Letters to friends and family rehearsed demands that press students to their limit, no matter the instruction of their decade. The litany remained the same. During the years in the 1840s at Columbia Female Institute in Tennessee, Mary Jane Chester minced no words about the rigors of her schooling. I am so very busy that I can scarcely spare the time to eat or sleep. I sit up late very night at night and generally rise with the sun. Half a decade earlier, Laura Brattle had sounded the same notes shortly after she arrived at Mrs. Murat's, the seminary she was attending at Bordentown, New Jersey, telling a sister who had still at home in Lewisburg, North Carolina, that she had been interrupted at least twice. She added, "I do not have time to write except between lessons. I am so constantly employed that I scarcely have time to eat, sometimes at night after I put up my books, and I feel almost crazed." The complaint issued by Eliza Adams in the middle of the 1820s had a similar resonance. "He might sit and write letters to me all the time if I only would. Whereas, poor as I am much limited as to time," she told her sister. Adams said took Harriet Adams Aiken through a typical day at a seminary in Concord, New Hampshire. "We are by no means allowed to spend 1 minute of the morning in anything but study. We're in school all the rest of the day, and the night we have to commence study at candle lighting." Students at Mary Lyons Mount Holyoke Seminary did the same, as Elizabeth Bull told her sister Mary. "We had all our rules given to us with regard to study," she noted. On the day of the seminary opened in the fall of 1837, students were to devote 9 hours daily to study, either reading, learning regular lessons, writing, or anything relating to regular school exercises. Reading text, preparing recitations, and writing compositions were all designed to instill mental discipline and decrease the range and depth of knowledge students commanded. In these daily exercise of reasoning and rhetorical faculties, students also expected to cultivate habits of reading and writing that they would practice the rest of their lives. Preparation for examination increased and intensified pressures as an already demanding quotation. Margaret Graham, a student at the Female College in Macon, Georgia, between 1842 and 45, had been compelled to sit up and study every night until 9 o'clock and rise before the day in the morning and study hard all day. Students at Emma Willard's Troy Female Seminary did the same. In the work before examination, one of the nearly 300 poems she wrote before her death at 17, Lucretia Davidson limed the personas adapted by her classmates. "One she had a headache, one a cold, another has her neck in a flannel roll," she observed. "Ask her the plain, and you are told next week's examination. Another frets and scolds, still another hopes, despairs, and sighs. Inquire about the cause, and each replies, next week's examination." Making light and poking fun, ending on the day of the public interrogation on occasion of all the students, including Davison, looked upon a momentous scripted as occasions in which students perform their learning before an audience of assembled dignitaries, including trustees, parents, teachers, and classmates. These events were even attracted local residents, marked students' formal entry into public life. On the morning of the exhibition, students, teachers, and trustees met and marched together to the school hall on the local church. Susan Nye, the head of the female department of North Carolina Raleigh Academy, recorded one such occasion. Early in the morning of June 9th, 1815, Nye assembled 10 of her charges, from whence she marched to the State House on our Sunday style. Once the students had been placed upon the stage, elegantly fitted up, and the trustees had taken their seats directly in front of the stage, the program of orations, recitations, and addresses began. At day's end, the proud teachers was able to say that the prospective graduates had impressed all the notables in attendance. Some programs lasted 2 days. Nearly a quarter of a century after she had graduated from Young Ladies High School in Providence, Rhode Island, Jane Anthony Eames recalled the examination of 1834. Of the first day of the high school's examination, Ames and her classmates had been interrogated for no less than 5 hours by a daunting cast of characters: our paternal derivatives, the faculty of Brown University, the school committee, the clergy, and others learned men of our city. The next day, the family and friends joined the examiners to observe a kaleidoscope display of learning. At one moment, students were soaring among the blue vaults of heaven, gazing at planets and distant worlds. Then Ames and her classmates took to blackboards to demonstrate their commands of mathematics. And still in another moment, they were talking of kings, queens, and royal personages, as though they were familiar, acquainted with them as they were with their own alphabet. Acquisitions in Latin, Greek, and French were brought forward for display. And then the concluding moment, the public performance of the composition students had written. Each Ames remembered as the grand finale. Lucinda Guilford, a student at Mount Holyoke Seminary from 1845 to 1847, had such a moment. Guilford's literary claims of the Bible was the final composition read to the assembled company. She told Francis Green, the letters made tangible the challenge of young women faced at these public examinations. Just to think of reciting history topics, the explaining principles of Olmsted before the faculty and students of Amherst College, is to say nothing of being puffed up on geology before the man that wrote the book. Cumulative examinations, students initiated publications, and commencement addresses illustrate not only the range of student subjects commanded, but the subjectivity that they were fashioning as learned women appareled in the values and vocabularies of Republican citizenship. Prospective graduates demonstrated projects of eclipses at the Female Classical Seminary in Brookfield, Massachusetts, recited from Susanna Rawson's Present for Young Ladies at the Academy. The author had delivered orations such as The True Greatness Not Conferred by Station by Brooklyn Female Academy, read compositions such as True Sensibility, Its Effects on Female Character at Yorkville Female College in South Carolina, and advocated for women's influence at Pennsylvania Female College in Harrisburg. Decades after Harriet Beecher Stowe had graduated from Sarah Pierce's Litchfield Female Academy, Charles Edward Stowe recalled the steps his mother had taken to save a composition that had been presented at the school's exhibitions. The essay had been carefully preserved, as he noted, on the old yellow sheets that cramped childish handwriting is still distinctly legible. In tucking away the composition and taking it with her as she moved from Litchfield to Hartfield to Cincinnati to Brunswick to Andover and then finally back to Hartford, Stowe testified to the importance she attached to the exposition of learning. Performances such as Stowe's were critical in shaping the subjectivity of students at female academies and seminaries. Emily Dickinson, who I have a couple books of hers here, can be seen as the exception that proves the rule. The poet, who would later refuse to appear in public under any circumstances, dreaded the time for the examination at Mount Holyoke Seminary. The interrogation was rather public than in the old academy, and a failure would be more disgraceful. Dickens reported to Abia Root, "We know, Dickinson, fervently hope that I shall not disgrace myself. Unfortunately, we do not know how she performed in that might well have been her first and last appearance in public." One of Eliza Adams' former classmates at a seminary in Concord, New Hampshire, felt the same sense of dread, at least initially. As she reported in August 1829, her limbs and voice trembled as much as at the first, that I was obliged to take my seat. Then, however, she had risen to the occasion. when she recalled as a want of confidence had been overcome, and as she proudly told Adam, she had acted as a rational being, hence the name of the chapter. In sharp contrast, Mary Bell, a student at the Greensboro Female College in North Carolina, was entirely self-possessed, telling her brother, who was enrolled at the University of North Carolina, there seems to be a universal ambition existing among the girls in college to receive the first honors in the commencement. Bial, knowing that she was one of these girls with an anticipation that bespoke her confidence, Bial declared, I'm going to try mighty hard to get the first honor. She admonished him in entering the list, saying, you must too. Dickinson, Adams, and Bial embraced the intellectual achievement embodied in these performances. It was the public dimension that elicited the varied responses. All of them understand that standing and speaking before the public represented a challenge of conventional models of womanhood. In 1829, Adams' friend felt fully the force of the prescription. However, and what proved to be crucial, she said, still more drawn to the subjectivity she had been crafting during her years as a student, now she experienced herself as a rational being, hesitant of the point of trembling before the challenge she was mounting to feminine conventions. Adams' friend at the last moment was able to bring the subjectivity to the fore. She stood and spoke. 20 years and a generation of students later, the prescriptive force had lessened. Bial and her classmates anticipated the performance of intellectual achievement with an eagerness that would have astonished Adams. The difference between Adams' friend and Bial could also be reckoned in a role that later played in encouraging those who might be intimidated by the standing and speaking. In 1849, it was not classmates who seemed to need her support. Perhaps her brother did not require it either, but if he did, Bial was really to rally him. During their years as female academies and seminaries, students displayed the knowledge they were acquiring in still other appearances before the public, essays, dialogues, poems, homilies, songs, and tales. They were written, were published in local and regional newspapers, in broadsides and pamphlets issued by the academies and seminaries, and in students-initiated newspapers and magazines. Many of these publications, lapsing with the graduation of editors and contributors, lasted for only a year or two, but others soon replaced them as succeeding generations made their way into print. Examples are numerous, including the Stars of Literature at Dickinson Seminary, the Schoolgirls Offering at Poughkeepsie Female Academy, the Young Ladies Magazine at Tapapsago Female Institute, the Female Student at Louisville Female College, and the Forest City Gem at Cleveland Female Academy, and Mrs. Porter's School. Students published in succession The Budget and the Revolver. The affiliations with alumni resulted in a material benefit in the magazines they sponsored. The Messenger Bird at Brooklyn Female Academy was published at the school's graduates, as was the Monthly Rose, a magazine issued jointly by alumni and students at Albany Female Academy. The Monthly Rose is one of the three imprints generated by Albany's notably expansive publishers. Students also issued the Planetarium, a weekly newspaper, and graduates, sponsored by exercises of the alumni, an annual publication of prose and poetry. The intensity with which students pursued knowledge and the pride they took in their achievements testified to the significance they attached to the newly available educational opportunities. That intensity, that pride, were manifest in the realness with which they embraced the books and learning which they had been preserved of men, and yet the role articulated with the likes of Benjamin Rush placed limits on what women ought to do with their well-stocked minds. Might graduate of female academies and seminaries refused the post-revolutionary compromise that had made the right to educational opportunity contingent upon the fulfillment of gendered obligations? Might they insist on the exclusive pursuit of self-actualization, whether they did or not, and with the few exceptions they did not, and women who commanded the same learning as of college-educated male, risking the label blue stocking? It was said that blue stockings were ostentatious. They were conceited pedants. They were heartless blues. Virginia lawyer and United States Attorney General William Wirt captured the essential feature of all that was lurking on these characters. The ostentatious display of intellect in a young lady is revolting. he told three of his daughters in 1829. How then might women educated at these schools negotiate the tension between the gender neutral ideals that informed their education and the gender specific roles that were expected to emulate? In counseling their granddaughter, Florida planter Marcus Stevens limed a model that replicated the self-representation of elite women had been performing since the last decades of the 18th century. Ostensibly, Stevens was simply making the measure of Mary Ann Primrose's education at the Burwell School at Hillsborough, North Carolina. He did that and much more in the narrative that illuminated the promise and problem inherent in women's education. Although he acknowledged that Primrose schooling should include music, drawing, and French, Stevens stressed that the higher branches of education, immerse yourself in history, geography, and some of the best ethical writers, he told her, focusing on the subject would be set Primrose apart from young women who, after displaying their social accomplishments, retire to their seats and sit mumchance until some dandy of a beau sidles up to them in dedicating herself to academic studies and adding to her stock of ideas. Primrose would be able to talk about more than the last ball or some such frivolities. She would have commanded the learning required to take part in the rational conversation. Any student in the antebellum academy or seminary would have been familiar with the relative values Stevens ascribed to ornamental and academic instruction, and she would have been equally familiar with the underlying premises that shaped her perspective on woman's intellectual potential, insisting that the minds of women and men are equal, and hers was equally vigorous as his. Stephen nonetheless cautioned Primrose to defer to her male counterparts. Should she act as a man's equal? Should she be instantly denounced as a bas bleu or blue stocking? It mattered little that the censure had no bias other than the lingering prejudice against women who openly displayed the learning men had long claimed that their privilege in French or English, the blue label, had to be avoided. Primrose could disguise her learning in conventions of gender deference and decorum, or as her grandfather cautioned her, she should use her knowledge with prudence and discretion. In her rehearsals of conventional modes of womanhood, catalogs, circulars, and plans of study sounded the same cautionary role. Maine female seminaries' exhortation was typical. It told parents and prospective students that instructors of the seminary were schooling their charges to be true women, to bless the circles in which they shall move with the fruits of cultivated thought and elevated affection. The same teachers at Adams Female Seminary, who had claimed for women an equal share in higher learning, insisted that they always made the paramount, the judicious choice of practical utility of their studies. Teachers at the Tennessee and Alabama Female Institute, who had proudly declared that students enrolled in the institute received the same education as their male counterparts, emphasized strongly that their charges were being prepared for a distinctive role. The Institute's women were fulfill the mandate articulated in the post-revolutionary compromise that had yoked educational opportunity to the gendered obligations. Educate the mothers and you educate the people, the school's motto proclaimed. Mindful of the persistent criticism of ladies who were too learned, teachers and principals sought to allay the apprehensions of parents concerned that their daughters would become disagreeable pedants, and at the head of Georgetown Female Seminary evoked an image that was familiar as it was redundant. The promise made by one S.L. English that schooling at the seminary in Georgetown would produce a gentle, unassuming, modest, and intelligent female marked higher learning radical potential as an agent in the creation of a subjectivity that challenged these conventions, and insisting that these traditional roles were still being upheld. The language of Republican womanhood, in which woman wielded an influence with only husbands and children, licensed a more expansive gendered republicanism that women had been deploying in civil society since the end of the 18th century. The claim that women's learning was dedicated not to self-actualization, but to social improvement was designed for the same purpose as it had served in the post-revolutionary articulation, legitimizing women's engagement in the making of public opinion. That is our end of our lesson today by Miss Kelley. I enjoyed reading it. We'll have more lessons in the future about antebellum America. Please like and subscribe and have a nice day.